Buongiorno a tutti. I will be speaking in English, but I'm really pleased to be back here in Napoli and grateful to the Foundation Made in Cloister for the invitation to this symposium. Napoli has been a city that is very welcoming to my work and collaborative endeavors. I also want to mark the presence of Cristina here, who is the director of a gallery in Napoli, Spot Gallery, and who hosted two collaborative projects that I've done with Anaïs Tondeur, the Chernobyl Herbarium, and more recently Fiori di Fuoco, which is a local project based in Napoli, in Terra dei Fuochi, with plants, ruderal plants that grow on toxic dumps and that combine the different senses of what we're going to be talking today, the rebirth as a kind of complex event that mixes the fires of toxicity with volcanic fire and with many other contradictory forces. But today I will be revisiting my earlier work on the phoenix complex, as it was announced, but in the context of a close connection between the phoenix and the sun. So the title of my talk is Phoenix Sun, with a hyphen. That will be very important for us, this hyphen between these two words. I will probably warn you that it will be a very swift ride through a lot of the classical history and approaches to the phoenix, but always keeping an eye to the solar provenance of this bird, which is not only a bird, as we will see, and which really combines all of what we call nature in this activity of birth and rebirth. Nature not as a kind of domain of natural beings, but nature is what it does, which is birthing, rebirthing, but also dying and redying. I want to start with a somewhat long quote from Gilbert Durand and his magnificent book, The Anthropological Structures of the Imaginary, where he contextualizes the phoenix precisely among solar symbols. And so this is what Gilbert Durand writes. In the medieval tradition, Christ is constantly compared to the sun. He is called Sol Salutis, Sol Invictus, and in a clear allusion to Joshua, Sol Occasum Nesciens. According to Saint Eusebius of Alexandria, Christians until the 5th century adored the rising sun. The rising sun is, moreover, very often compared to a bird. Here we come to the phoenix, right? In Egypt, the god Atum is called the great phoenix who lives in Heliopolis. Heliopolis is the city of the sun, and prides himself on having placed the crown of feathers on his head. Ra, the great solar god, has the head of a sparrowhawk, while for the Hindus, the sun is an eagle and sometimes a swan. Mazdeism assimilates the sun to a rooster, which heralds daybreak. And our Christian bell towers, like the bell that we've just heard, are still surmounted by this bird, the rooster, the cock, right? Which symbolizes the vigilance of the soul, waiting for the arrival of spirit and the birth of the great dawn, end quote. Now, as I mentioned, I really admire the tremendous work that Durand has done in his encyclopedic book, The Anthropological Structures of the Imaginary. But I would also add that it perhaps escapes Durand that a symbol can never be purely spectacular. He talks about the solar symbols, talks about the phoenix, in particular among these, as spectacular symbols. If a symbol is a spectacle through and through, without a trace of the obscure and the invisible, without internal fracturing, without ambivalence in the relation of the symbolizing and the symbolized, without the density and the depths of matter and the body, if a symbol lacks all of this, then it's no longer a symbol. So a symbol cannot be purely glorious, radiant, shining, spectacular, solar. Just as sharing its root with day, divinity cannot be entirely glorious and shining, diurnal and celestial, because then, if it were to be so, it would leave behind the chthonic realm, the region of the night, of the day's other, that is nonetheless an innate aspect of the day, insofar as it separates one day from another and comprises a vital part of the 24-hour cycle. So the night, obscurity, darkness cannot be set apart from a day, even in the understanding of divinity that has this diurnal aspect to it. The sun, for its part, is too bright to be a spectacle. The sun is too bright to be a spectacle. It renders everything visible. It is a spectacularizing force which also induces blindness as a result of a direct stare at it. So the sun allows us to have all kinds of spectacles, but it itself cannot be a subject of a spectacle, because then we would go blind by staring directly at it. That the great phoenix atum is compared to the rising sun is a sign of spectacular birth and life, as much as of death and darkness, out of which it rises, challenging the framework of a spectacle. So when we talk about rebirth, we have to remember, as the Hindu tradition, for instance, reminds us, a constant re-death and the re-emergence of what is reborn from the realm of the dead, with which it still keeps very close connections. The rising sun is the memory and the anticipation of decline, of decadence and decay, of the descending phase of the celestial body and of mortality. Though repeatedly overcome, death returns as much as birth in the routines of the phoenix and the sun, of sunsets and sunrises that day in, day out silently indicate that the sun is finite, a dying star granting life to us earthlings, the us that is only fractionally human. So this is what the sun tells us. It's a dying star that grants us life. It's thanks to the death of the sun, the gradual death and entropy of the sun, that everything is allowed to live. From ancient Egypt to ancient India, the insight, repeated in various forms over and over again, is that rebirth and re-death belong together. And Heraclitus, with the phoenix, quietly retort, not the least, the re-death and the rebirth of the sun. In this light, at once too faint and too intense to contemplate, in the light of light and darkness, of sunlight and heat, of life and death, or life-death, I would like to venture my first hypothesis. Rather than a solar symbol, the phoenix is the sun, and the sun is the phoenix. So I don't want to talk about this nexus, this connection between the phoenix and the sun in terms of metaphors or symbolisms. I want to rather postulate that the phoenix is the sun and the sun is the phoenix. This is not to deny other classical associations between the marvelous bird and a certain tree, namely date palm. I have one here on my shirt. Date palm that is called Phoenix dactylifera in the Latin classification, actually. And we can talk a little bit later why a date palm is called the phoenix. The territory of Phoenicia, which is also associated with the phoenix, a comet, and indeed the entire universe as a dying, living, and reborn sublime animal or plant, associations that I explore in the phoenix complex. In one way or another, the sun's impossible brilliance and its descent into darkness, its passages and passings that hand everything to seeing within the time limits that do not pre-exist this donation, are as much a singular condensation of a more general sphere of associations and of being, as the phoenix is with regard to nature and its activities and passivities of death and rebirth. The sun, then, is the phoenix of the phoenix. The phoenix stands out among the other interpretations of what the sun does, and in so standing turns into a synecdoche, a part of for the whole, a part stands in for the whole of their entire chain, a part that stands in for the whole of the associations with the sun. But there is more. Disturbing the relation of causes and effects, of the symbolizing and the symbolized, of figure and ground, the synecdoche obviates the copula along with the logic of symbolization. There is no is, no subject and predicate that would bind together. What we're dealing with is the phoenix sun. That's why I emphasize this hyphen. It's not that the phoenix even is the sun and the sun is the phoenix. I want to talk about the phoenix sun. The hyphen separating and uniting the two words, opening channels of communication and substitution between them, well in excess of symbolism and an ontological articulation by the copula. So let me backtrack a little bit and dip into some of the classical tradition that associates the phoenix with the sun before moving on to the Christological associations that we find mostly in the work of Saint Hildegard of Bingen, to whom I have dedicated a lot of theoretical attention recently as well. Now, Durand's cursory reference to Atum, the Egyptian god of the setting sun, in the context of the phoenix, needs further specification. Above all, because even at the level of the word itself, phoenix is a later Greek adaptation from ancient Egyptian. In fact, between the sun god and the phoenix, as their historical, linguistic, and associative link, or an embodied hyphen, we find the bird Bennu, which is the ancient Egyptian bird, represented as a golden hawk with a heron's head. As an incarnation of the sun god, Bennu, probably transcribed into Greek as phoenix, is a source of shining and a personification of radiance, seeing also that its name is derived from the verb wbn, which means to rise radiantly, to shine. The sunrise that he heralds, the sunrise that this bird Bennu heralds, is the event of a new birth, but it is an event welded to the preceding death, to the sunset of Atum and his admission to the underworld for the nocturnal journey in anticipation of a new day. So we have to understand, within the cosmology of ancient Egypt, the sun also dies every day, and it dies literally. The sun at sunset enters on the western bank of the Nile, enters the waters, and continues its journey under the earth before being reborn in the east the following day. Right? This is to put us in the sunset of ancient Egypt. This is what happens. The sunset really allows the sun to die, to pass under the earth, and to be refreshed from that death, to be refreshed by the non-necessity of constant shining, of constantly giving light and heat, and to be reborn the next day. And so, like Atum, Bennu is as solar as he is earthy, immediately or non-mediately spanning these typically polarized domains. Bennu is, after all, the conjunction of the primordial mound, Ben, the first dry land that, according to Egyptian thinking, emerges, is called Ben, and the watery abyss Nu, from which this dry land emerges. So Bennu is the combination of this dry land of the mound, Ben, and the watery abyss Nu. The mound is revered as the dwelling place of Atum, of the god of the setting sun. In its probable transcription of Bennu, the phoenix or the phoenix carries on these subterranean celestial histories. The phoenix's emanation from the sun lets it sustain life in the present with solar energy and lends it new vitality via the same source. So in the classical tradition, 4th century Latin poet Claudian writes that he, the phoenix, and I quote here Carmina Minora, from Carmina Minora, the poem De Ave Fenice of Claudian. Claudian writes that the phoenix needs no food to satisfy hunger, nor any drink to quench thirst. The sun's pure heat is his food, and he drinks the windy nutriments of Tethys, taking nourishment from innocent vapors, right? So the phoenix has a solar nourishment, a little bit like plants that receive their energy from the sun. And 12th century Byzantine poet Johannes Tzetzes writes that the phoenix, I quote, builds its nest of delightful smell on trees, and when it dies, is born again as a worm from that tree, and then is nourished by the heat of the sun and turns into a phoenix once again, unquote. Right? Nourished by the sun, the phoenix is markedly vegetal, despite his animal figuration as a bird. But because solarity is equally important for his nourishment and reproduction, that is, as Hegel would say, his reproduction in himself and in another, then the sun melds together the two capacities into a single faculty, the Aristotelian to threptikon, or the vegetative soul, responsible for these two powers of nourishment and reproduction. Both the form and the content of the phoenix's psychology and physiology, then, are plant-like without canceling out his emanation from the sun. Now, the hyphenated immediacy of the encounter phoenix-sun holds many surprises in store for us. Here, seamless emanation, the phoenix arising from the sun, is of a piece with an intense opposition, which is also energizing and revitalizing. I recall in this respect the poetic account presented by 6th century Christian grammarian Johannes de Gaza in his Descriptio Tabulae Mundi, in which Johannes de Gaza writes that, clapping his wings, the phoenix, who places himself opposite the sun, endeavors to seize the blaze of the sun ray and to immolate himself of his own accord. So to steal the ray of the sun. As I note in the Phoenix Complex, a Promethean leitmotif runs through the story of rebellion in which nature rises up against nature, unleashing a contra natura force within natura. The phoenix standing in opposition to the sun, stealing its ray, not clinging to its waning biological vitality, and earning the right to be by renouncing its actual being, right? There is a logic of sacrifice and self-sacrifice that needs to be really understood in its details here. And it's a renunciation of immediate vitality. The immediate waning, dissipating life of the phoenix is renounced for the sake of renewed life, right? This is the kind of logic we're dealing with here. But whereas the theft of fire by Prometheus sets the scene for the technology of artifacts, producing and reproducing the prosthetic supports for a vulnerable and naked existence in this life, the capture of a sun ray by the phoenix lifts the curtain on what I call the technology of salvation. The technology of salvation, producing and reproducing life itself after and beyond death. The phoenix's opposition to the sun is actually his opposition to himself, hence the notion of a contra natura force within natura. Sacrifice and self-sacrifice bespeak the power of radical individuation. It is not just giving up oneself, but actually reclaiming oneself as an individual in and through this sacrifice, which from Aristotle to Hegel is denied to plants. The near merging of nourishment and reproduction, of producing a future extension of one's own existence in oneself or in another being, serves as an argument, particularly in Hegel's philosophy of nature, for the relative non-differentiation and indifference of vegetal existence not needing to sacrifice itself. And because it does not need to sacrifice itself, so the argument goes, not only in Hegel, but throughout the metaphysical tradition in the West, plants can be sacrificed to the needs of others, whether animal or human, without any limitations whatsoever on this sacrifice. The phoenix's self-immolation, the phoenix's self-incineration in the end of a long life, despite or perhaps thanks to his close affinity to the plant world, functions as an implicit argument against this Hegelian deduction. Now, let's be very clear. The phoenix's self-immolation is also the self-immolation of the sun. It's burning and burning up on the cosmic altar. Here we have to understand both in terms of Egyptian cosmology and ancient cosmologies, for instance, in India, that the entire cosmos is an arena for sacrifice. Everything that is being sacrificed. And the sun with its fire, with its celestial fire, is the main element that allows for the sacrifice to happen, but that is also sacrificed every single day, and that is being reborn, allowing the sacrifice to be carried out afresh. Right? So there is no ontology, there is no being without this sacrificial staging, without this ritual offering of the entire universe on the burning altar of fire of the sun, right? It is precisely as a dying star that the sun can grant life to the rest of finite beings. So it is not only my reference to the physics of entropy when I talk about a dying star granting life, but also the ritualistic notion of sacrifice extended to cosmic proportions here. Now, at the crux of the phoenix sun, there is still another synecdoche, a double or a triple one, counts no longer matter here, of the phoenix and the cosmos, that dies and is reborn in itself at regular periods. So you know that for ancient Greeks, for instance, in pre-Socratic such as Heraclitus, the cosmos is a shining, burning, ornamental order, a shining, burning whole that flickers, that gets more intense and less intense at various periods, that is kindled and extinguished in measures, as Heraclitus puts it. And this measured kindling and extinguishing of the cosmos makes of it a kind of gigantic phoenix that is constantly born and reborn and dies in itself. These regular periods have been measured in very specific measures in the ancient world. For instance, the Sotic period, the Egyptian Great Year, which amounts to 1,461 solar years, is said to be the presumed lifespan of a phoenix. So a phoenix is said to live for almost 1,500 years, and this coincides with the great cosmic cycle of the kindling and extinguishing of the cosmos. Expending heat, the organismic substratum of animal life lives by burning itself up. So our animal vitality as well, insofar as we burn calories, insofar as we live by burning energy in ourselves, is a kind of burning ourselves up, right? It is not only a use of energy, but a kind of self-sacrifice that keeps going on in the guise of life living itself. And the global fires of industrial combustion intensifies the dynamic of animality and solarity here below. So we are turning the earth into another sun, which is, in a sense, as we will see toward the end of my talk, the deep truth of the earth. The earth in its depths is another sun. And we are accelerating this. By we, I mean the industrialized humanity that is using also fossil fuels, especially, to power itself. These global fires of industrial combustion are turning the earth into another burning sacrificial offering, mimicking the sun, but also quashing the prospects of rebirth. So now let me turn very briefly to the Christian dynamics of the phoenix sun, specifically with regard to the thinking of Saint Hildegard of Bingen. The sacrificial and self-sacrificial overtones of the phoenix sun have lent themselves to a Christian reading since the very beginning of Christianity. In his 2nd century treatise, De Carnis Resurrectione, Tertullian emphasizes the voluntarily assumed death of the phoenix in a parallel with Christ's self-sacrifice for humanity. And it's so fitting that we're speaking in this context of a revamped, reborn cloister about this kind of thematic. So this is what Tertullian writes. If the whole world faintly figures resurrection, so the entire world is a faint sign of resurrection, and if, moreover, there is no other such sign as this, then take a most complete and unassailable symbol of our hope, the most concrete, unassailable symbol of Christian hope. And he continues, I refer to the bird, which is peculiar to the East and famous for its singularity, marvelous for its posthumous life, renewed from voluntary death, unquote. Other authors consider the Star of Bethlehem to be a comet, which is the brilliant trail of a phoenix's flight, which of course appears at the time of the birth of Christ, while still others claim that this divine birth or human divine birth of Christ is announced by the appearance of the phoenix on the temple roof in Jerusalem. In the mystical visions and in the liturgical poems of 12th century polymath and Benedictine abbess, St. Hildegard von Bingen, Christ appears more precisely as the phoenix sun. Her writings belong to the very same medieval tradition in which, as Durand observes, Christ is constantly compared to the sun. He is called Sol Salutis, Sol Invictus, and in a clear allusion to Joshua, Sol Occasum Nesciens. While the connotations of the sun that doesn't set, Sol Occasum Nesciens, the sun that never sets, will later be those of the empire, from the Spanish to the British. These global empires have defined themselves as the empires over which the sun never sets, assuming these phoenix and Christian kind of symbolisms for their political project. In the Christian, or rather the Christological frame of reference, the expression loses sight of Christ's death and resurrection in a phoenix-like mode. Although Hildegard affirms the solar aspect of Christ, she does not see in him the epitome of the eternal noon, of the sun that never sets. In her mystical visions, collected in Scivias, she writes, I quote, "The sun signifies the Son of God, and the moon designates the Church. Sol autem significat filium meum, sed luna ecclesiam designat." The moon reflects the light of the sun at night, in the night of the world, in the darkness of worldly existence, which it dimly illuminates not of its own accord. Were the night to be vanquished forever, were Jesus to become Sol Occasum Nesciens, there wouldn't have been either the moon, the church, or the time of the day, that is of the night, when it shines. The phoenix sun is also this, the one who alternates with the moon and is altered, not maintaining his eternally fixed identity. When in another mystical vision Hildegard revisits the solar figuration of Jesus, she makes clear that it irradiates much more than intense luminosity. So it's not just only brilliant light that the sun gives, it also gives heat. And it's a combination of the light and the heat that is life-giving, according to the ancient belief in the two essential powers of fire, light and heat. And my argument in another work is that we have largely forgotten this heat-giving power of fire and have focused too much on the cold, dispassionate light of reason that the Enlightenment tradition has privileged, cutting off the two powers of fire from one another. So, but returning to Hildegard, for her, Jesus is the Son of Justice, Sol Justitiae. And I quote her, "With the brilliance of burning love, fulgorem ardentis caritatis, of such great glory that every creature is illuminated by the brightness of his light." Unquote. In the Son of Justice, the two ancient powers of fire, namely light and heat, join together to illuminate and to warm up all that is with burning love. Its justice is far from formal. It is barely distinguishable from caritas, or divine love. Perhaps the only difference between justitia and caritas is in the extension, and indeed the dispensation of the effects of the latter by and through the former, allowing, with the mediation of glory, each one, every creature, to bask in its light and heat. And just as the astronomical sun both illuminates the terrestrial fold and gifts it with life-giving warmth, so the phoenix sun of justice promises the rebirth of everyone it touches. In her hymns, collected in Symphonia, Hildegard allots to Mary the role of another phoenix, albeit not of the kind that the Atum Bennu prototype related to the setting sun that it stands for. She is the dawn who gives birth to a new sun. So I quote from the hymn here. "From your womb came another life, the life that Adam stripped from his children." And again from another hymn, "But from your womb, O dawn, O aurora, has come forth a new sun, novus sol processit, that cleansed all the guilt of Eve." The dawn is the womb of another life and of a new sun, of rebirth rather than of an immediate birth. A liminal, transitional state, the Marian dawn is closer to the activity and the being of the phoenix, precisely by virtue of her liminality. The ephemeral bridge she suspends between darkness, the womb of the womb, the flesh itself, and light. But instead of burning up in a fire that will reduce the old body, life, or even the old sun to ashes, the combined phoenix sun, who is Mary and Jesus, is a blaze that loves and warms up, illuminates and promises rebirth non-destructively. The very principle of viriditas, this unique word that Hildegard gifts us with, viriditas, which literally means greenness, but conceptually implies the dynamic principle of finite existence capable of refreshing itself and living on beyond and despite death without any divine intervention. Viriditas is, according to Hildegard's hymns, akin to the phoenix sun. So I quote very briefly here. O most noble viriditas, that is rooted in the sun, che radicas in sole, you blush like dawn and burn like a solar flame, unquote. The blushing dawn and the burning solar flame are Mary and Jesus, respectively, within the scheme of the Christian phoenix, this complex Christian phoenix that gathers into itself also sexual difference. It is he and she, Mary and Jesus, the mother and the son, the dawn and the solar flame. What the hymn's poetic lines add to the scheme is a strange notion of rootedness in the sun, che radicas in sole, which turns plant roots upside down or downside up, and which on the face of it replicates the signature move of Western metaphysics that ever since Plato pictured humans as heavenly plants rooted in the realm of ideas. So in Timaeus, Plato imagines the human being, all of us, as having invisible roots that grow from our heads, the realm of our thinking or the organ of our thinking, up to the world of ideas. So while plants are rooted in the soil with their visible roots, we are rooted in the realm of ideas with our invisible roots. And Hildegard plays on and with this imagery from Plato by saying that viriditas, the power of rebirth that is most concentrated in plants but is shared by all living beings, is actually rooted in the sun, right? But to be fair, Hildegard is not just repeating the Platonic gesture, the metaphysical gesture of inverting the plant. She's not, her intuition is that vegetal roots are dispersed among all the elements. Plants are rooted in the earth as much as in the sun that energizes them and in the water that nourishes them. The pre-Socratic Empedocles, in fact, presages her intuition when in an extant fragment he calls the elements, stoicheia. In fact, Empedocles is the one who invents the elements, the four classical elements you are all familiar with, the earth, fire, water, and air. So these four elements, and ether is sometimes added as the fifth one. These stoicheia are called roots, according to Empedocles himself. He calls them the primordial roots, rhizomata proton of all things. So they're not the building blocks, they're not like molecules or atoms, they are the first roots of all things. The rootedness of viriditas in the sun is therefore not exclusive. It merely highlights the solar side of the Christian phoenix, the flaming and dawning green rebirth. So now moving to my conclusion, I want to very briefly mention the work of Friedrich Schelling and this mirroring, a return to the mirroring of the solar sacrifice, the solar burnt offering that we saw in the phoenix, in the burnt offering of the earth, and especially the volcanic process, given that we are right here close to the slopes of the Vesuvius, and in a city, in a region that is so marked by volcanic activity as well. Because the volcano is another phoenix, obviously, and another burning kind of phoenix that gives us a certain hint about the becoming sun of the earth, or the inner sun that the earth itself harbors in its depths. If the elemental roots are dispersed without any of the elements enjoying a fundamental and decisive role, then mirroring the phoenix sun is the phoenix earth. One such mirror for the two phoenixes is Friedrich Schelling's 1804 text on system of philosophy in general and the philosophy of nature in particular. There he writes, apropos of the combustion process, the burning, Verbrennungsprozess, and I quote him very briefly. Every combustion process is a sacrifice of individuality. When the sun represents the ideal principle in relation to the earth, as it were, sacrifices itself to the sun, as it does in the volcanic process, although, like a phoenix, it again revives from the ashes by the power of its indwelling individuality and binds itself in a relation to the sun afresh, end quote. Right? So we are back to square one, the logic of sacrifice. In combustion, Schelling implies, the universal element consumes the particular. Fire consumes the individuality of things, right? And the fire is the one that claims the identifiable figure and form, material form of the things it burns. The dialectical point that Schelling overlooks, I would claim, together with Hegel here, is that the sacrifice of individuality dispenses a more profound sense of individuality onto the subject of the sacrifice. So nothing is really lost in this burning, but rather a more profound sense of individuality is gained from this negation by fire. Another dialectical insight is that the allocation of particularity and universality to the earth and the sun respectively pits them against each other, but also by subterranean means reconciles them. On the one hand, the inner fire of the earth, our planet's molten core, represents its inner sun, the universality hidden in the particular that occasionally breaks out in the volcanic process, which Schelling cites, the process shaping and molding the landscape, right? As the lava flows cool down, they shape the surface of the earth. The sacrifice of the earth's surface to its fiery depths that precisely come to the surface evokes the phoenix simile. The burning earth cools down and revives from the ashes as fertile soil, ready to welcome vegetal growth. Its renewed relation to the sun is then mediated by plants, which likewise represent the recipients of the ideal principle of the sun. The indwelling individuality of the earth is not only a new relatively stable form it receives from lava flows once they cool down, but also, and especially, the forming and generative powers that enable the growth of plants and of the life of everything that is. The earth is thus reborn both as itself, with new geophysical formations, mountain ranges, valleys, and so on, and as the other, the plants that sprout from rich volcanic soil. And what about the phoenix sun? Is it not reborn in itself, as itself, same and other, each day at dawn, as fragment 6 of Heraclitus suggests? And elsewhere I dedicated a lot of attention to a reading, a very close reading of this fragment 6 of Heraclitus, where Heraclitus says that the sun is new every day. The sun is new every day, right? Solar rebirth happens in time, but it is also a 0 point of time, its rhythms, alternations, and alterations temporalizing existence. Each time anew it testifies to the rebirth of the cosmic catastrophe, of the catastrophe that is the cosmos in miniature. Neither unvanquished, sol invictus, nor unsetting, sol occasum nesciens, the phoenix sun recovers its brilliance after traversing the stretch of darkness and death, of death de-absolutized, reduced to no more than a stretch between lives. In an unavoidably ambiguous turn of phrase, we could say that the phoenix sun is setting unsetting and vanquished unvanquished, or generally finite infinite. There is nothing certain, practically and theoretically, or generally about this infinite finite rebirth, about this of the infinite rebirth, solar or otherwise, and its associated effects of invincibility or indestructibility. We are always under the impression that it will keep happening, but we might be mistaken, especially today, when the earthly phoenix, its combustible fossil entrails gutted, is at the point of exhaustion. We put our faith in the phoenix sun. It is without a doubt better to rely on the sun for energy the way plants do, without destroying anything to procure it. At issue is not solar power per se, but the desire for unlimited energy it comes to embody, and the half-repressed phoenix complex it continues to propagate. I thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie Michael per questo bellissimo intervento. Avete domande o volete 5 secondi? C'è una domanda in fondo? O volete una piccola pausa, un caffè, prima una meditazione su tutto quello che avete sentito, una pausa di riflessione? Abbiamo una domanda.
Salve, buongiorno Michael. Innanzitutto grazie di essere qui a Napoli e alla Fondazione Made in Cloister. La domanda è: in questo ciclo infinito di rinascita, di nascita, rinascita, morte, si reitera sempre la stessa esistenza o c'è una sorta di cambiamento? E se c'è un cambiamento, se è casuale oppure si è affidato a un qualche progetto cosmico? Grazie.
Yes, I understand. Yes. Yes, this is a fundamental question, I think, because with the routines of the phoenix, there seems to be a kind of automatism, an automatic death and rebirth, and a new death and a new rebirth that continues in the cyclical manner. And in fact, in a part of the classical tradition, this seems to be the case, especially the tradition that we associate with the figure of the phoenix, that is immediately burnt up by fire, be it solar fire or the fire it sets to itself, and that is reborn from the ashes. But if we dig a little bit deeper, we can see in the dozens of versions of the story of the phoenix in classical antiquity a much more uncertain materialist tradition, as I would characterize it, where rebirth is not so certain, where metamorphoses are given their due, and where the matter and time are not obviated, are not cancelled out by this instantaneous rebirth from the ashes. So I'm thinking about the accounts of the phoenix that, for instance, speak about the old phoenix dying in its nest and gradually decomposing in it and releasing the fluids of decomposition from which a small vermin is born that in due time metamorphoses into a mature phoenix that then takes its predecessor to Heliopolis and offers the dead body of the predecessor on the altar of the sun god there. So the sun again reemerges, but in a much more subdued way, leaving more space and more time and more uncertainty and possibility of metamorphosis in the process. I think one of the problems for us, I mean really everyone living in the 21st century, is a kind of automatism, internalized automatism of the hope of the phoenix that things will keep re-emerging afresh almost automatically without anything really dying or going away irrecoverably. And this is something to be countered. It is not so easy to counter this because, as I claim in the Phoenix Complex book, in the meanwhile, this has become a deeply held unconscious complex, a little bit like the Oedipal complex and other complexes that Freud talks about, but perhaps still more ancient, because the Phoenix complex, as I see it, goes back to the Neolithic period when the first human communities practiced slash and burn agriculture, when they set a plot of land on fire in order to fertilize it with the ashes of whatever burned there and make it arable, make it agriculturally appropriate. And so from these ancient practices, this has become a kind of deeply internalized unconscious structure that guides much of our thinking and behavior without us realizing it with regard to the future. No matter what we burn today will regenerate tomorrow. And this is no longer true precisely because the very fragile conditions for life today are not sustaining anymore this automatism of the Phoenix complex in its idealized version. So I would pay, just in response again to your question, pay much more attention to other parts of the tradition that are more obscure, half forgotten, materially attentive, but also to this interval or gap between lives that does not offer a guaranteed possibility of rebirth, and that may be extended maybe indefinitely and not be a simple pause or interval or a leap from one life to another.